I never imagined a boardroom humiliation would lead to the defining moment of my career. But when Gregory Palmer publicly belittled my presentation and dismissed my 6 years of expertise in front of our most valuable clients, something unexpected happened. I found my voice. What my boss didn't realize as he smugly collected his papers that afternoon was that in 24 hours, everything would change when his most lucrative client specifically requested me instead of him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Galloway Financial Partners office gleamed as morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Polished marble floors reflected the hustle of financial advisors navigating between glass-walled meeting rooms, their designer shoes clicking purposefully across the expanse. This 32nd floor office space in downtown Chicago represented everything I had worked toward since graduating from Northwestern with my MBA: prestige, sophistication, and the promise of financial security that had eluded my family for generations. I stood before the bathroom mirror, making final adjustments to my appearance before the Blackstone presentation. My charcoal pantsuit was impeccably tailored, my dark hair secured in a sleek chignon, and my minimal jewelry selected to convey professionalism without distraction. After 6 years at Galloway, I had learned the unspoken rules of corporate image management. Be polished but not flashy, confident but not threatening, memorable but never controversial. Olivia Chen, Senior Investment Strategist. The title on my embossed business cards represented thousands of hours of analysis, client meetings, and sacrificed weekends. At 32, I had built a reputation for thorough research and innovative investment approaches tailored to high-net-worth clients. My portfolio consistently outperformed market averages by significant margins, something I took quiet pride in while navigating the delicate politics of a firm where family connections and social pedigrees often outweighed performance metrics. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Megan. Conference room A ready. Blackstone team arriving in 15. Palmer asking for you. Gregory Palmer was the kind of boss business schools used as case studies in leadership. Charismatic, strategically brilliant, and pathologically incapable of sharing credit. At 45, he had risen to managing director through a combination of remarkable client acquisition skills and ruthless internal politics. He had recruited me personally from my previous position at a smaller firm, promising mentorship and advancement opportunities that had proven selective at best. Our relationship had been cordial, but increasingly strained over the past year as my client portfolio grew and my investment strategies gained attention from the firm's executive committee. Palmer had begun inserting himself into my client meetings, more frequently, often redirecting conversations to emphasize his oversight of my promising but developing approaches. I gathered my presentation materials and headed toward Conference Room A, mentally reviewing the key points of my proposal for Blackstone Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate representing over $30 million in managed assets. After 3 months of intensive research and analysis, I had developed a restructuring strategy that would significantly reduce their tax exposure while positioning them for expansion into emerging Asian markets. The presentation had been my primary focus for weeks. I had meticulously prepared for every potential question, conducted extensive scenario testing, and created visualization tools that would make complex financial projections accessible to the client's executives. My proposal represented not just a strategic investment plan, but an opportunity to elevate Blackstone's entire approach to global market participation. As I approached the conference room, I could see through the glass walls that the Blackstone team had already arrived. CEO Richard Blackstone, CFO Diane Miller, and their newly appointed Director of International Operations, James Harper. They were engaged in conversation with Palmer, who was laughing with the practiced ease of someone who had mastered the art of client relations. I entered the room with a confident smile, extending my hand first to Richard Blackstone, a silver-haired, industry veteran I had worked with extensively over the past 4 years. "Olivia, good to see you," Blackstone said warmly, his handshake firm. "Palmer has been telling us about the presentation you've prepared. We're looking forward to it." "We've been impressed with your quarterly reports," added Diane Miller, the sharp-minded CFO who had initially expressed skepticism when I took over their account from a retiring senior partner. "Particularly your analysis of semiconductor manufacturing opportunities in Taiwan." Before I could respond, Palmer smoothly interjected, "Olivia has been working under my guidance on a comprehensive approach. Shall we begin?" I distributed the presentation portfolios I had prepared, containing executive summaries of my strategy along with supporting data visualizations. Palmer took his seat at the head of the conference table, positioning himself between me and the clients in a subtle but unmistakable power move. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, advancing to the first slide of my presentation. Over the past quarter, we've conducted an extensive analysis of Blackstone Industries' current market position and future growth opportunities, with particular attention to tax-efficient expansion strategies in emerging Asian markets. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through my research findings, investment recommendations, and projected outcomes. The clients were engaged, asking thoughtful questions that I answered with confidence, supporting my points with specific data points and historical precedents. The energy in the room was positive, with Richard Blackstone nodding appreciatively at several key insights. Then came the pivot point. My recommendation for a phased approach to manufacturing facility development in Vietnam, rather than the more obvious choice of China. This strategy represented the most innovative aspect of my proposal, based on emerging economic indicators and regulatory shifts I had been tracking for months. "The Vietnamese opportunity presents several advantages," I explained, highlighting comparative data points. "Lower labor costs than established Chinese manufacturing zones, fewer regulatory hurdles for technology transfer, and significantly, more favorable tax treatment for foreign corporate entities, particularly following the new trade agreements ratified last quarter." James Harper, the International Operations Director, leaned forward with interest. "This contradicts our internal assessment team's recommendation. They've been pushing strongly for the Shenzhen expansion." "I've reviewed their analysis," I acknowledged. "Their approach is sound based on historical data, but doesn't account for the regulatory shifts announced in February, which substantially change the cost-benefit equation." I was about to elaborate when Palmer cleared his throat, a sound I had learned to recognize as a warning. He shifted in his chair and fixed me with a look that immediately set alarm bells ringing. "I think what Ms. Chen means to suggest," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "is a theoretical alternative that might warrant consideration, alongside the more established Chinese expansion strategy our senior team has typically recommended." The subtle undermining was familiar. Palmer recasting my thoroughly researched recommendation as a speculative alternative, while simultaneously asserting the authority of unnamed senior advisors who supposedly favored more conventional approaches. "Actually," I clarified, maintaining my professional demeanor, "the Vietnamese strategy isn't theoretical. It's supported by comprehensive economic modeling and regulatory analysis that indicates a 22% higher 5-year return with substantially reduced political risk." Palmer's expression hardened imperceptibly. "Perhaps we should move on to the more conventional aspects of the proposal," he suggested, reaching for the presentation remote to advance past my most innovative recommendations. I placed my hand on the remote before he could take it. "I believe Mr. Harper was interested in the regulatory details supporting this approach," I said, maintaining eye contact with our clients rather than Palmer. "Would you like me to elaborate on the specific advantages, James?" Harper nodded. "I would, actually. The regulatory details are particularly relevant to decisions we're making next quarter." I proceeded with my explanation, providing the substantive analysis that supported my recommendation. The clients remained engaged, with Richard Blackstone taking detailed notes. For several minutes, the presentation continued productively, with thoughtful exchanges between myself and the key Blackstone team. Then came the moment that would change everything. As I concluded my analysis of the Vietnamese opportunity, Diane Miller asked a penetrating question about currency hedging strategies to mitigate risks associated with political instability in the region. It was a sophisticated question that demonstrated her grasp of the proposal's nuances. "That's an excellent point," I acknowledged. "We've developed a three-tiered hedging approach specifically designed to—" "I think we're getting off track with these speculative scenarios," Palmer interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge now. Olivia tends to get caught up in theoretical approaches that, while interesting academically, often lack practical application in real-world investment contexts. The room fell silent. The dismissal was blatant. Palmer wasn't simply redirecting the conversation but actively undermining my credibility in front of our most valuable clients. "These aren't theoretical approaches, Gregory," I responded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "They're data-driven strategies based on comprehensive market analysis and regulatory expertise." Palmer smiled thinly. "Your enthusiasm is commendable, Olivia, but perhaps we should ground the discussion in approaches that have been validated by more experienced advisors." He turned to Richard Blackstone. "Richard, you remember the Taiwanese manufacturing expansion we structured for Westlake Industries last year? That followed our traditional approach and has yielded consistent returns without unnecessary experimentation." The dismissal was public, pointed, and personal. Unnecessary experimentation, positioning my thoroughly researched recommendations as risky departures from sound strategy, while more experienced advisors emphasized my junior status despite my 6 years of dedicated service to the firm and consistently superior performance metrics. Richard Blackstone glanced between us, clearly registering the tension. "We're certainly interested in proven strategies," he said diplomatically. "But innovation is also valuable, particularly in rapidly evolving markets." "Of course," Palmer agreed smoothly. "Which is why Olivia's ideas make an interesting supplement to the core strategy our senior team has developed. Now, regarding the primary investment allocation recommendations." For the remainder of the presentation, Palmer systematically marginalized my contributions, repeatedly referring to Olivia's supplementary research, while positioning himself as the architect of the primary strategy. He interrupted my responses to client questions, reframed my most innovative ideas as speculative alternatives, and repeatedly emphasized his oversight role in managing my work. The humiliation was comprehensive and deliberate. By the time we reached the conclusion, I had been effectively sidelined in my own presentation, reduced to a supporting player in what should have been a defining professional moment. The Blackstone executives exchanged glances occasionally, clearly registering the dynamic but maintaining professional composure. As we concluded, Richard Blackstone rose to shake hands. "Thank you both for the presentation. There's certainly a lot to consider. We'll need to review the materials in detail with our team." "I'm available for any follow-up questions," Palmer offered immediately. "My direct line is best for any strategic discussions. And I'd be happy to provide additional data or analysis on any aspect of the proposal," I added, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the burning humiliation. James Harper, who had shown particular interest in my Vietnamese manufacturing recommendation, caught my eye briefly. "Your analysis of the regulatory environment was particularly detailed, Olivia. I'd like to follow up specifically on those points." Before I could respond, Palmer interjected. "I'll make sure our regulatory team provides comprehensive documentation. We have specialists who focus exclusively on Southeast Asian markets." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The implication was clear. He was positioning me as merely the presenter of work developed by others, removing any direct line of communication between me and the clients. As the Blackstone team departed, Palmer turned to me with a tight smile. That didn't reach his eyes. "Let's debrief in my office in 15 minutes, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I gathered my materials with hands that weren't entirely steady, acutely aware of the administrative assistants who had witnessed the entire exchange through the glass walls. News of my public undermining would spread quickly through the office. Grapevine. Palmer's office occupied a prime corner position with sweeping views of Lake Michigan. The space was meticulously designed to impress. Original artwork, custom furniture, and carefully chosen mementos signaling his connections to wealthy clients and prestigious institutions. "Close the door," he instructed as I entered. I did, as directed, and took a seat across from his imposing desk without waiting for an invitation. "That presentation didn't go as smoothly as it could have," he began, his tone suggesting I was entirely responsible for any issues. "It was difficult to maintain flow with frequent interruptions," I responded evenly. Palmer's expression hardened. "Your role was to present the firm's recommendations, not to promote untested approaches that contradict our established strategy. The Vietnamese opportunity isn't untested. It's supported by comprehensive data analysis and represents a significantly more advantageous approach than the Chinese expansion." "That determination isn't yours to make," he said sharply. "You're part of a team that operates under my direction. Your continued insistence on promoting your individual perspectives undermines our collective approach." The unfairness of this characterization was breathtaking. I had spent months developing a comprehensive strategy specifically tailored to Blackstone's needs, only to have Palmer position my work as a rebellious departure from some non-existent collective approach. "I developed this strategy based on extensive research and data analysis," I said, struggling to maintain my professional tone. "The recommendations are sound and in the client's best interest." "The client's best interest is served by consistent, proven approaches developed under experienced leadership," Palmer countered. "Your eagerness to distinguish yourself is becoming problematic, Olivia. This isn't the first time you've attempted to position your individual contributions above the firm's collective expertise." The gaslighting was so blatant it was almost impressive. Palmer was recasting my diligent work and innovative thinking, qualities the firm had ostensibly hired me for, as problematic grandstanding. "My only concern is developing the most effective strategies for our clients," I said firmly. "The data supports the approaches I recommended today." Palmer leaned back in his chair, studying me with cold calculation. "Your technical capabilities have never been in question, Olivia. It's your understanding of organizational dynamics that concerns me. Success at Galloway requires more than analytical skills. It requires alignment with leadership and recognition of hierarchical realities." The message couldn't have been clearer. My continued advancement depended not on the quality of my work, but on my willingness to subordinate my expertise to Palmer's ego. "I understand organizational dynamics perfectly well," I replied, a new steadiness in my voice. "I simply believe that our primary obligation is to provide clients with the most advantageous strategies, regardless of who develops them." "That perspective may be better suited to a different environment," Palmer said, the threat barely veiled. "Galloway operates on a team model with clear leadership structures. If you find that approach constraining, perhaps it's time to consider whether this is the right fit for your career aspirations." The ultimatum hung in the air between us. After 6 years of dedicated service, consistent outperformance, and the development of valuable client relationships, Palmer was suggesting I might need to leave because I refused to allow him to take credit for my work or compromise the quality of my recommendations. "I'll consider your feedback," I said neutrally, unwilling to be baited into a response that could later be characterized as insubordination. "Do that," Palmer replied, turning his attention to his computer screen in a clear dismissal. "And Olivia, I'll handle the Blackstone follow-up personally. Their relationship with the firm predates your arrival by many years. The additional power move was unnecessary but typical. Palmer asserting control over client communications to ensure I couldn't build independent relationships with key accounts. I left his office with my professional dignity intact, but my career prospects at Galloway clearly damaged. As I returned to my desk, I noticed the sidelong glances from colleagues who had undoubtedly already heard about my public undermining in the Blackstone presentation. My assistant Megan approached cautiously. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly, concern evident in her expression. "Just the usual organizational dynamics," I replied with forced lightness. "Could you pull together the Westridge portfolio analysis for my review? I need to prepare for tomorrow's client call." "All ready on your desk," she confirmed. "And Olivia? For what it's worth, your Vietnam recommendation has been circulating among the research team. The analysts think it's brilliant." The small validation was welcome, but did little to address the larger reality I now faced. After 6 years of building my career at Galloway, I had reached an impasse that offered only unacceptable choices: subordinate my professional integrity to Palmer's ego, or consider leaving the firm I had helped build into an industry leader. As I reviewed the Westridge portfolio that afternoon, I couldn't stop replaying the Blackstone presentation in my mind. The deliberate undermining, the public positioning of my work as supplementary, the erasure of my expertise in favor of some mythical senior team whose superior wisdom Palmer constantly invoked. By 6 o'clock, most of the office had emptied. I remained at my desk, methodically updating client files and preparing transition notes for each account. If Palmer's comments were indeed leading toward my eventual departure from Galloway, I would ensure that my clients received seamless service, regardless of who managed their portfolios after me. My phone rang at 6:42 p.m., an unknown Chicago number. I considered letting it go to voicemail but answered on the third ring. Olivia Chen, speaking. "Ms. Chen, this is James Harper from Blackstone Industries," said the voice on the other end. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." The unexpected direct contact immediately raised my guard. Palmer had explicitly stated he would handle all Blackstone communications personally. "Not at all, Mr. Harper. How can I help you?" "I wanted to follow up on your Vietnam manufacturing recommendation," he said. "Your regulatory analysis was significantly more detailed than what we've received from other advisors, and I'm particularly interested in the specific tax structures you mentioned for technology transfer operations. I'd be happy to provide additional details," I replied cautiously, aware that any direct client communication could be portrayed by Palmer as insubordination. Though I should mention that Mr. Palmer has indicated he'll be handling the Blackstone relationship directly. There was a brief pause before Harper responded. "I see. Well, I specifically wanted to speak with you about your analysis, Ms. Chen. Your understanding of the regulatory nuances seemed exceptionally thorough." "Thank you, Mr. Harper. I've been tracking Southeast Asian manufacturing regulations for several years, particularly following the policy shifts implemented after the most recent trade agreements." Our conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes as I elaborated on specific aspects of my Vietnamese manufacturing recommendation. Harper asked insightful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in the approach, focusing particularly on the comparative regulatory advantages over Chinese expansion. "This is exactly the kind of detailed analysis we need," he said as our conversation concluded. "I appreciate your time this evening, Ms. Chen. I suspect we'll be speaking again soon." After ending the call, I sat in the empty office considering the implications. Harper's direct contact suggested the Blackstone team had recognized Palmer's undermining tactics and chosen to circumvent them. While gratifying professionally, this development would likely further strain my already precarious position with Palmer if he discovered the communication. As I finally left the office at 7:30 p.m., the Chicago skyline glittering against the darkening sky, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity emerging from the day's humiliation. For 6 years, I had navigated Galloway's political landscape, making compromises and accepting slights for the sake of career advancement. Today's events had forced me to confront the ultimate question: how much of my professional integrity was I willing to sacrifice to succeed within a system that fundamentally devalued my contributions? I didn't yet have an answer, but as I drove home through the evening traffic, one thing became increasingly clear. Whatever came next would be determined by my choices, not Gregory Palmer's. What I couldn't possibly know as I pulled into my apartment building garage was that the following day would bring a development that would transform my professional trajectory in ways I couldn't begin to imagine, and that Palmer's public humiliation of me would ultimately prove to be the greatest career gift he could have possibly given me. Sleep eluded me that night. My apartment, a carefully designed space overlooking Millennium Park that had always been my sanctuary, felt confining. As I paced between rooms, replaying the day's events and considering my options, the digital clock on my nightstand marked each passing hour of sleeplessness: 1:17 a.m., 2:43 a.m., 4:22 a.m. By 5:30 a.m., I abandoned any pretense of rest and brewed a strong cup of coffee. Standing at my kitchen window, watching the first hints of dawn illuminate the Chicago skyline, I drafted 3 distinct plans for my professional future. Plan A: remain at Galloway, but establish clearer boundaries with Palmer, documenting all communications and building independent relationships with other executives who might provide counterbalance to his influence. Plan B: begin discreetly. Exploring opportunities at competing firms, leveraging my track record of outperformance and cultivated client relationships. Plan C: the most radical option: establish my own boutique investment advisory practice focused on international expansion strategies for mid-sized manufacturing companies, a niche I had developed particular expertise in over the past 3 years. Each path presented distinct challenges. Remaining at Galloway meant continuing to navigate Palmer's territorial behavior and likely facing further marginalization. Moving to a competitor would reset my seniority clock and potentially involve non-compete challenges given Galloway's aggressive stance on client relationships. Starting my own practice represented the greatest risk financially, but offered complete professional autonomy. By 7 a.m., I had dressed in one of my most confident outfits, a tailored navy suit with subtle pinstripes and a crisp white blouse. The external polish helped mask the uncertainty churning beneath the surface. Whatever the day brought, I would face it with professionalism and dignity. I arrived at the office an hour earlier than usual, determined to prepare for the Westridge client call scheduled for 11 a.m. The trading floor was nearly empty, with just a few early analysts preparing for market opening. The quiet allowed me to focus on finalizing my presentation without office politics intruding. At 8:45 a.m., Megan arrived with an expression that immediately signaled something significant had occurred. "Morning," she said, placing a coffee on my desk. "You've got messages already." "From?" "Richard Blackstone called at 8:15, asked to speak with you directly. When I said you weren't in yet, he left his cell number for you to return his call as soon as possible." His assistant also sent a meeting request for 10 a.m. today at their downtown office. I maintained a neutral expression despite my surprise. Richard Blackstone rarely made direct calls, typically routing communications through his executive team. And on-site meetings at client offices were unusual, particularly with such short notice. "Anything else?" Megan hesitated. "Palmer is looking for you. He came by your office twice already. Seems agitated." "I see. Did Blackstone indicate what he wanted to discuss?" "No details. Just that it was urgent and he needed to speak with you personally." I considered the implications. Blackstone's direct outreach following yesterday's presentation and Harper's evening call suggested unusual interest in my recommendations. Palmer's agitation likely meant he had discovered Harper had contacted me directly, contradicting his directive to handle the Blackstone relationship personally. "Please, let Mr. Palmer know I'll find him after I return Mr. Blackstone's call," I said, reaching for my phone. Megan nodded and departed as I dialed Blackstone's cell number, preparing for any possible scenario. "Blackstone," he answered on the second ring. "Mr. Blackstone, this is Olivia Chen returning your call." "Olivia, thank you for getting back to me promptly." His tone was cordial but carried an undertone of urgency. "I'd like to meet with you this morning to discuss your Vietnam manufacturing proposal in more detail. Would 10 a.m. at our office work for you?" "Yes, I can make that work," I replied, mentally rearranging my schedule. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to prepare for the meeting?" "Bring whatever supporting analysis you have for the regulatory advantages you outlined yesterday. James Harper was quite impressed with your insights and has brought them to my attention. We're particularly interested in the comparative tax implications for technology transfer operations." "I'll bring the full analysis," I confirmed, careful, to maintain a professional tone despite the vindication I felt. "Will Mr. Palmer be joining us for this meeting?" There was a brief pause before Blackstone responded. "No, I've requested specifically to meet with you. This is a preliminary discussion about your strategic approach." The implication was clear. Blackstone wanted to hear my recommendations without Palmer's interference. This represented both an exceptional opportunity and a potential political minefield at Galloway. "I understand. I'll see you at 10 a.m. As I ended the call, I noticed Palmer standing in my office doorway, his expression tightly controlled but clearly displeased. "Good morning, Gregory," I said evenly. "I understand you had direct communication with James Harper yesterday evening," he said without preamble, closing my office door behind him. "After our explicit discussion about client communication protocols." His immediate confrontation confirmed my suspicion that he had ways of monitoring client contacts, likely through the firm's communication systems or informants within Blackstone's organization. "Mr. Harper called me directly with specific questions about regulatory aspects of the Vietnam proposal," I explained calmly. "I provided factual information as requested by the client. Any contact from Blackstone should have been directed to me immediately," Palmer insisted, his voice carrying a sharp edge despite his attempt at control. "We discussed this clearly yesterday afternoon. I informed Mr. Harper that you had indicated you would be handling the relationship directly," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "He specifically requested to discuss the regulatory analysis with me personally." Palmer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Blackstone relationship represents over $30 million in managed assets. Client communications need to be coordinated through relationship managers, in this case me, to ensure consistent messaging and strategic alignment. I recognized the corporate doublespeak for what it was, an attempt to control all client interactions and claim credit for my work. Before yesterday, I might have acquiesced to maintain office harmony. Today, something fundamental had shifted. Strategic alignment shouldn't prevent clients from accessing the specific expertise they need, I countered. Mr. Harper had technical questions about regulatory analysis that I was best positioned to answer. "That's not your determination to make," Palmer said, his tone hardening. "Client relationship management is established by firm protocol, not individual preference." I was formulating a response when my phone rang. Megan calling through on the office line. I raised an apologetic finger to Palmer and answered. "Yes?" "Richard Blackstone's assistant is online too, confirming your 10 a.m. meeting at their office. Should I tell her you'll be there?" The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Palmer's expression shifted from controlled displeasure to genuine surprise. "Please confirm the appointment," I said clearly. "Let her know I'll bring the complete regulatory analysis as requested." As I hung up, Palmer's surprise transformed into something closer to alarm. "You have a meeting scheduled with Blackstone?" "Yes, at 10 a.m. at their downtown office. Mr. Blackstone called earlier to request a follow-up discussion about the Vietnam manufacturing proposal. "When was this arranged?" he demanded. "Just before you arrived, Mr. Blackstone called personally to request the meeting." Palmer processed this information rapidly, his calculating mind visibly reassessing the situation. "I'll need to join you for this meeting. The Blackstone relationship requires consistent management." Mr. Blackstone specifically requested to meet with me alone to discuss the regulatory analysis, I replied, the words carrying more confidence than I had felt 24 hours earlier. "I believe honoring the client's preferences is consistent with Galloway's commitment to responsive service." Palmer's expression hardened, the mask of collegial management slipping to reveal the raw calculation beneath. "This is highly irregular and potentially undermines the firm's relationship management structure. As your supervisor, I'm directing you to include me in any client meetings." The explicit power play would have intimidated me previously. Today, it merely clarified the dynamics I had long suspected, but never directly confronted. "I understand your concern," I said carefully. "However, Mr. Blackstone has made a specific request as our client. Disregarding his preference would seem counterproductive to maintaining the relationship Galloway values. I'm happy to provide you with a complete briefing following the meeting." Palmer's expression shifted again, a new calculation clearly forming. "Very well, but I expect a detailed report immediately following your return. And Olivia, remember that you represent Galloway Financial Partners in this meeting, not your individual perspectives." The implicit warning was clear, but no longer carried the weight it once had. Of course, the client's interests remain my primary concern as always. After Palmer departed, I gathered the comprehensive regulatory analysis I had prepared for the Vietnam proposal, including comparative tax structures, technology transfer protocols, and labor law implications across Southeast Asian manufacturing centers. The data thoroughly supported my recommendation, with projected 5-year returns significantly exceeding the Chinese alternative Blackstone had been considering. At 9:30 a.m., I left for the Blackstone Industries headquarters, located in a sleek glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. Their reception area reflected the company's manufacturing heritage, industrial materials transformed into elegant design elements, with steel and glass predominating. "Ms. Chen," the receptionist greeted me. "Mr. Blackstone is expecting you. Heather will show you to the conference room." A polished young woman led me through security and up to the executive floor, where the views of the city were even more impressive than from Galloway's offices. The conference room she directed me to was smaller than I expected, an intimate setting with seating for 6 rather than the grand boardroom I had anticipated. "Ms. Chen," Richard Blackstone greeted me, rising from his seat at the table. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice." "Of course, Mr. Blackstone. Please call me Richard. We've worked together long enough to dispense with formalities." Also present were James Harper and a woman I didn't recognize, who Blackstone introduced as Dr. Mei Lin, Blackstone's newly appointed Vice President of Asian Operations. Dr. Lin has extensive experience in both Chinese and Vietnamese manufacturing, Blackstone explained. "She's joining us to provide operational context for your regulatory analysis." The presence of both Harper and Lin, senior executives with specific expertise relevant to my proposal, suggested this was no courtesy meeting but a serious evaluation of my recommendations. The absence of Diane Miller, the CFO who had been present yesterday, was notable but not necessarily significant. "I've brought the complete regulatory analysis supporting the Vietnam recommendation," I said, distributing folders containing the detailed assessment. "Excellent," Blackstone replied. "Before we begin, I want to clarify something. James mentioned you were directed not to communicate directly with Blackstone representatives. Is that accurate?" The direct question took me by surprise. "Client advisor? Relationships typically maintain the fiction of seamless organizational cooperation rather than acknowledging internal politics." There was some discussion about relationship management protocols, I acknowledged carefully. Blackstone's expression suggested he understood the diplomatic evasion. Ms. Chen, Olivia, let me be direct. We've been working with Galloway for nearly a decade. During that time, we've observed certain patterns in how information is filtered and presented to us. Yesterday's presentation raised concerns about whether we're receiving complete and unfiltered analysis. James Harper nodded. In agreement. The Vietnam proposal you outlined offers significant advantages over the Chinese expansion our internal team recommended. Yet it was repeatedly characterized as supplementary or theoretical during the presentation, despite the comprehensive data you've now provided. Dr. Lin, who had been reviewing my analysis, looked up. These regulatory assessments align with my operational experience in both regions. The labor cost differentials and technology transfer protocols are particularly well documented. Blackstone leaned forward. Olivia, I'll be direct. We value expertise and transparent analysis in our advisors. Yesterday's presentation suggested a disconnect between your analysis and how it was being positioned by Mr. Palmer. Today, we want to hear directly from you without intermediary filtering. The invitation was clear but fraught with professional implications. Direct criticism of Palmer would be unprofessional and potentially damaging to Galloway's client relationship. Yet the moment demanded authenticity rather than political navigation. I stand firmly behind the Vietnam recommendation, I said carefully. My analysis indicates it offers superior returns with lower regulatory risk compared to the Chinese alternative. The supporting data is comprehensive and has been thoroughly vetted. Yet Palmer seemed determined to redirect attention to the Chinese option, Harper observed. Is there a reason for that discrepancy? I chose my words with precision. Investment strategies require balancing multiple factors, including established precedent and emerging opportunities. Different advisors may legitimately weight these factors differently. Dr. Lin smiled slightly at my diplomatic response. In my experience, established business relationships in China often create institutional inertia that makes it difficult to pivot to emerging markets like Vietnam, despite compelling data. Her comment offered a graceful interpretation that acknowledged the underlying issue without requiring me to directly criticize Palmer's approach. Indeed, I acknowledged. Established relationships and investment patterns create familiar frameworks that can sometimes supersede emerging data. Blackstone studied me for a moment before speaking. Olivia, we've made a significant decision based partly on yesterday's presentation and James's follow-up conversation with you. We're reorganizing our manufacturing expansion strategy to prioritize Vietnam over China for the next phase of development, following your recommended approach. The news was professionally validating, but potentially complicated my position at Galloway. If Blackstone was adopting my recommendation over the firm's official position, as characterized by Palmer, the political fallout would be substantial. That's a substantial shift in strategy, I observed neutrally. It is, Blackstone confirmed, and it leads to our second decision. We would like you to serve as Blackstone's primary investment advisor moving forward, with direct reporting to our executive team. The request was extraordinary. Clients typically engaged with firms rather than individual advisors, and relationship transitions were carefully managed to maintain institutional connections. Blackstone was effectively requesting a reorganization of their Galloway relationship structure with me as the primary point of contact. I appreciate your confidence, I replied carefully. However, Galloway operates on a team model with established relationship management protocols. Harper leaned forward. We understand the professional constraints, Olivia. Let me be more direct. We value your specific expertise and analytical approach. If maintaining you as our primary advisor requires adjustments to our relationship with Galloway, we're prepared to have that conversation at the executive level. The implication was clear. Blackstone was prepared to leverage their status as a major client to secure my role as their advisor, potentially even following me if I left Galloway. The possibility was simultaneously flattering and alarming. "May I ask what prompted this request?" I asked, seeking to understand the full context before responding. Blackstone exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. "Transparency and expertise are non-negotiable requirements for our financial advisors. Yesterday's presentation revealed a pattern of information management that concerns us. Your analysis was consistently positioned as secondary or speculative despite its evident quality and supporting data." Dr. Lin nodded in agreement. "The technical rigor of your regulatory assessment is exceptional. That level of detailed understanding is precisely what we need for navigating emerging markets successfully." Additionally, Harper added, "Our subsequent conversation revealed that you were effectively being discouraged from direct client communication, despite having the most comprehensive understanding of the strategy you developed. That raised significant concerns about information flow and access to expertise." The validation was profound after years of having my contributions marginalized or appropriated, yet the professional implications required careful consideration. "I value Blackstone's business tremendously," I said carefully, "and I'm committed to providing the highest quality advisory services. However, any restructuring of the relationship would need to be addressed at the organizational level between Blackstone and Galloway leadership." "Understood," Blackstone replied, "which is why I've scheduled a meeting with Jonathan Galloway himself for this afternoon to discuss our concerns and requirements moving forward." Jonathan Galloway was the founding partner and CEO, a semi-retired figure who rarely involved himself in client relationship management. His direct involvement signaled the seriousness of Blackstone's position. "In the meantime," Blackstone continued, "we'd like you to walk us through the implementation timeline for the Vietnam strategy, particularly the regulatory filing sequence and tax structure establishment." For the next hour, I detailed the implementation approach for Blackstone's Vietnamese expansion, addressing specific questions from all three executives. The conversation flowed naturally, with my expertise acknowledged and valued without the constant reframing and undermining I had experienced with Palmer present. As the meeting concluded, Blackstone walked me to the elevator personally, an unusual courtesy that signaled the importance he placed on our conversation. "Olivia, I want to be transparent about my concerns," he said as we waited for the elevator to arrive. "We've invested millions with Galloway based on the expectation of receiving the firm's best analysis and recommendations. What I observed yesterday suggested that political considerations might be influencing the guidance we receive. I assure you that my recommendations are always based on thorough analysis and the client's best interests," I replied carefully. "I believe that," he said, "which is precisely why I've requested that you serve as our primary contact moving forward. I'll be making that position clear to Jonathan this afternoon." The elevator arrived, and I stepped in, my mind racing with the implications of the morning's developments. "Thank you for your time today," I said professionally. "I look forward to hearing the outcome of your conversation with Mr. Galloway." As the elevator descended, I leaned against the wall, processing the extraordinary turn of events. In 24 hours, I had gone from being publicly undermined by Palmer to having Blackstone, our largest client, specifically request me as their primary advisor and arrange a meeting with the CEO to ensure it happened. My phone buzzed with a text message from Megan. "Palmer looking for you, says it's urgent. Also, Jonathan Galloway's assistant called requesting you be available for a 3 p.m. meeting in the executive conference room." The pieces were falling into place with remarkable speed. Blackstone had clearly wasted no time in arranging the meeting with Galloway. Palmer's urgency suggested he had been informed of the situation and was frantically attempting to regain control of the narrative. As the elevator reached the lobby, I texted back, "Returning to office now. We'll find Palmer upon arrival." Walking back to Galloway's offices through the busy downtown streets, I felt a profound shift in my professional perspective. For years, I had navigated corporate politics by making calculated compromises, accepting partial credit for my work, and allowing my contributions to be repackaged through the filter of more senior voices. Yesterday's humiliation had seemed like a professional setback. Today, it was revealing itself as a pivotal moment that had exposed the true dynamics at play and catalyzed a fundamental realignment. By attempting to publicly diminish my expertise, Palmer had inadvertently highlighted it, creating the very client connection he had sought to prevent. As I approached the Galloway building, I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin slightly. Whatever awaited me in the afternoon's meeting with Jonathan Galloway, whether opportunity or confrontation, I would face it with the confidence of knowing my work spoke for itself when allowed to reach those who recognized its value. Palmer's public humiliation had been intended to diminish me. Instead, it had created the circumstances for my expertise to be truly seen and explicitly requested by our most significant client. The irony was not lost on me as I stepped through the revolving doors and prepared to navigate the transformed landscape of my professional future. The day was far from over, and the 3:00 p.m. meeting would likely determine the trajectory of my career at Galloway, or beyond. But for the first time in years, I was approaching a pivotal professional moment not with anxiety about political navigation, but with the quiet confidence of knowing my work had spoken more eloquently than any corporate positioning ever could. The Galloway Financial Partners lobby bustled with midday activity as I returned from the Blackstone meeting. Financial advisors escorted clients through security checkpoints, analysts hurried between meetings with portfolio updates, and the unmistakable energy of money in motion permeated the space. For 6 years, I had been part of this ecosystem, gradually climbing the ranks while navigating its complex political currents. Today, those currents felt different, as though a storm was brewing beneath the polished professional veneer. "Olivia," Megan called as I approached my office suite. "Palmer's been looking for you every 15 minutes. He seems agitated," I suggested. "I was going to say panicked," she replied quietly. "And there's something else. Jonathan Galloway's executive assistant came down personally to confirm you'd be at the 3:00 meeting. She mentioned it would include the managing partners." This was significant. The managing partners, Jonathan Galloway, Rebecca Winters, and Michael Chen, no relation to me, comprised the firm's executive leadership and rarely involved themselves in individual advisor matters. Their participation suggested the Blackstone situation had escalated to the highest levels with remarkable speed. "Thank you, Megan. Please let Palmer know I'm back and we'll speak with him shortly. Also, please reschedule my remaining appointments for today." As Megan departed, I took a moment to organize my thoughts. The meeting with Blackstone had gone exceptionally well, with their executives clearly valuing my expertise and analytical approach. Their request to have me serve as their primary contact represented both a professional endorsement and a political complication. The upcoming meeting with Galloway's leadership would determine how these conflicting forces would resolve. Before I could formulate a strategy, Palmer appeared in my doorway, his typically immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of stress, a slightly loosened tie, an uncharacteristic wrinkle in his shirt cuff. "You met with Blackstone this morning," he stated, closing my office door firmly behind him. Not a question, but an accusation. "Yes, at their request," I confirmed. Mr. Blackstone wanted to discuss the Vietnam regulatory analysis in greater detail. "And you didn't think to inform me of this meeting before attending?" His voice carried controlled anger beneath its professional veneer. "The meeting was arranged on short notice this morning. I intended to brief you afterward, as I mentioned when we spoke earlier." Palmer's expression tightened. "I've just received a call from Jonathan Galloway's office. There's a meeting at 3:00 with the managing partners regarding the Blackstone relationship." Apparently, Richard Blackstone called Jonathan directly with concerns about account management. He watched me carefully, searching for any indication that I had orchestrated this development. I maintained a neutral expression while acknowledging the information. Yes, Mr. Galloway's assistant confirmed I should attend that meeting. What exactly did you say to Blackstone? Palmer demanded, professional pretense giving way to direct confrontation. I presented the detailed regulatory analysis supporting the Vietnam manufacturing recommendation as requested. Mr. Blackstone, Mr. Harper, and Dr. Lin, their new VP of Asian Operations, had specific questions about implementation timelines and tax structures. And did you make any comments about Galloway's relationship management approach? Did you suggest any dissatisfaction with the current structure? The question revealed Palmer's primary concern, that I had actively undermined his position with our largest client. The reality was more organic. Blackstone had drawn their own conclusions from observing yesterday's dynamics. I maintained complete professionalism regarding Galloway's organizational structure, I stated truthfully. The discussion focused entirely on the technical aspects of the Vietnam proposal. Palmer studied me with obvious skepticism. Then why is Blackstone suddenly demanding changes to their relationship management structure? Richard Blackstone and I have worked together for 8 years. Now he's calling our CEO directly after one meeting with you? Mr. Blackstone did express interest in having direct access to the specific expertise relevant to their expansion strategy, I acknowledged carefully. That's not unusual for complex international projects. Palmer's expression darkened. Blackstone represents $34 million in managed assets. Any restructuring of that relationship could have significant implications for quarterly targets and team compensation structures. The subtext was clear. Palmer's performance metrics and bonus structure were directly tied to the Blackstone relationship. Any change threatened not just his ego, but his financial standing within the firm. I understand the significance of the relationship, I replied evenly, which is why providing them with the most effective strategic guidance should be our priority. Our priority, Palmer countered, emphasizing the first word, should be maintaining consistent client relationship management through established channels. Your direct communication with Blackstone has created unnecessary complications. The irony was striking. Palmer was attempting to position my expertise, which Blackstone specifically requested, as a complication in the client relationship. This inversion of client service priorities revealed the fundamental disconnect between his approach and mine. Mr. Blackstone has explicitly requested certain analytical support for their expansion strategy, I noted. As their financial advisors, shouldn't meeting those requests be our primary consideration? Palmer's jaw tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. You're missing the broader picture, Olivia. Client relationships require careful cultivation through consistent leadership. Individual contributors support that structure. They don't circumvent it. The fundamentally different worldviews were now fully exposed. Palmer viewed client relationships as hierarchical structures to be controlled and managed from above, while I saw them as collaborative partnerships focused on delivering specific expertise where needed. We seem to have different perspectives on effective client service, I observed quietly. Clearly, Palmer agreed, his tone sharpening. And one of those perspectives aligns with Galloway's established protocols. The 3 o'clock meeting will determine whether your approach has a place within this organization. The threat was explicit now, the pretense of collegiality abandoned. Palmer was positioning the upcoming meeting as a referendum on my future at Galloway. I look forward to discussing these important considerations with the managing partners, I replied, maintaining professional composure despite the clear escalation. Palmer studied me for a moment longer, perhaps searching for signs of intimidation or uncertainty. Finding none, he turned toward the door before delivering a final remark. For someone who has benefited significantly from Galloway's platform, and client relationships, your recent actions demonstrate remarkable ingratitude. I would recommend careful reflection before this afternoon's discussion." After he departed, I sat quietly at my desk, processing the interaction and its implications. Palmer's attempt to frame my expertise and client responsiveness as disloyalty revealed much about the value system he operated within, one where hierarchical authority outweighed client needs, where political positioning trumped technical excellence. For 6 years, I had navigated within that system, making calculated compromises while trying to maintain my professional integrity. Today's confrontation had crystallized the fundamental incompatibility of these approaches. Whatever the outcome of the 3 o'clock meeting, a decisive inflection point had been reached. I spent the next 2 hours preparing for the partner meeting, assembling a comprehensive overview of the Blackstone relationship, including performance metrics, communication, histories, and detailed documentation of the Vietnam analysis that had catalyzed the current situation. If my professional future at Galloway was to be evaluated, I would ensure the discussion was grounded in substantive data rather than personalities or politics. At precisely 2:55 p.m., I gathered my materials and headed toward the executive conference room on the top floor. Unlike the main office areas with their glass walls and open sightlines, the executive level maintained an old-world privacy with wood-paneled corridors and solid doors. The aesthetic reflected Jonathan Galloway's preference for traditional financial environments, a striking contrast to the contemporary design that characterized the client-facing spaces below. The executive conference room occupied the building's northwest corner, offering panoramic views of the Chicago skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The massive oak table that dominated the space could accommodate 20 people, but typically hosted much smaller groups for the firm's most sensitive discussions. When I entered, Jonathan Galloway was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents with reading glasses perched low on his nose. At 72, he maintained an impressive physical presence, tall, straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that had evaluated countless investment opportunities over his 50-year career. Rebecca Winters sat to his right, the firm's managing director of client services, who had built Galloway's reputation for exceptional client experiences. Michael Chen, chief investment officer and the strategic architect behind the firm's remarkable growth over the past decade, occupied the seat to Galloway's left. Palmer was already seated midway down the table, his position subtly reflecting his status within the organizational hierarchy. Important enough to be included, but not part of the innermost leadership circle. "Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us," Jonathan Galloway said, gesturing to a seat opposite Palmer. "We have some important matters to discuss regarding the Blackstone relationship." "Of course, Mr. Galloway," I replied, taking the indicated seat and arranging my materials neatly before me. "I've had a rather interesting conversation with Richard Blackstone this afternoon," Galloway continued, removing his reading glasses. After nearly a decade of working with Galloway Financial Partners, he's suddenly requesting significant changes to their relationship management structure. Specifically, he's asked that you serve as their primary advisory contact moving forward. The direct acknowledgement of Blackstone's request immediately altered the meeting's dynamic. Rather than the performance review or disciplinary discussion Palmer had implied, Galloway was framing it as a client service consideration. Rebecca Winters leaned forward slightly. "Before we continue, Olivia, I'd like to hear your perspective on how this situation developed. Gregory has shared his understanding of events, but I'd value your insights directly." The invitation was professionally delivered but carried significant implications. Winters was known for her meticulous approach to client service issues, prioritizing substantive resolution over political considerations. "Of course," I replied, gathering my thoughts carefully. "The situation appears to have developed from the Blackstone presentation yesterday, where I presented a recommendation for Vietnamese manufacturing expansion rather than the Chinese alternative they had been considering. This morning, Mr. Blackstone requested a follow-up meeting specifically to discuss the regulatory analysis supporting that recommendation. And this recommendation represented Galloway's official position? Michael Chen asked, his expression neutral but evaluative. The question directly addressed the central conflict without requiring me to explicitly criticize Palmer. I chose my words with precision. The recommendation was based on comprehensive regulatory and financial analysis I developed over the past 3 months. During yesterday's presentation, there were differing perspectives on how to position these findings for the client. Gregory has characterized your approach as departing from Galloway's established investment thesis for Asian manufacturing, Jonathan Galloway noted, watching me carefully. He suggests you presented a personal viewpoint rather than the firm's collective position. The mischaracterization needed addressing, but direct contradiction would appear unprofessional. I opened the portfolio containing my analysis and selected several key documents. I've brought copies of the complete analysis supporting the Vietnam recommendation, I said, distributing the materials. The research followed Galloway's established methodology for international investment evaluation, including comparative regulatory assessment, tax structure analysis, labor cost projections, and political risk factors. The data strongly supported the Vietnam approach based on every metric in our standard evaluation framework. Michael Chen began reviewing the materials with evident interest, his background in quantitative analysis making him a natural evaluator of the technical merits. This is remarkably thorough, he commented after several moments. The regulatory comparisons are particularly detailed. Palmer shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the discussion's trajectory. The technical analysis isn't at issue, he interjected. The concern is about relationship management protocols and how investment recommendations are communicated to key clients. Rebecca Winters fixed him with a measured look. Actually, Gregory, the technical analysis is very much relevant. If Olivia's recommendation was substantively supported by comprehensive research following our established methodologies, that context matters significantly. Precisely, Michael Chen agreed. Our reputation is built on delivering superior analysis and recommendations to clients. If we have internally developed expertise that isn't being effectively communicated because of relationship management concerns, that represents a structural problem. The conversation was evolving in an unexpected direction, examining systemic issues rather than individual actions. Jonathan Galloway, who had been listening carefully, turned his attention back to me. Olivia, in your meeting with Blackstone this morning, did you advocate for changing their relationship structure with Galloway? No, sir, I replied truthfully. I maintained complete professionalism regarding our organizational structure. Mr. Blackstone raised the issue independently after reviewing the detailed regulatory analysis. Galloway nodded thoughtfully. That aligns with Richard's comments. He indicated that yesterday's presentation revealed what he called information filtering that concerned him. He specifically mentioned your recommendations being repeatedly characterized as supplementary or theoretical, despite their evident quality and supporting data. Palmer leaned forward, his expression tightening. Investment strategies require contextualizing for clients. Presenting multiple approaches, with appropriate weighting, is standard practice. Perhaps, Galloway acknowledged. But Richard Blackstone has been a sophisticated financial client for over 30 years. He values direct access to substantive expertise without what he termed unnecessary filtering. His specific comment was that yesterday's presentation suggested a pattern of information management that raised concerns about whether they were receiving our best analysis. The meeting's dynamics had shifted dramatically. Rather than defending my actions, I was observing a higher-level discussion about Galloway's approach to client service and expertise deployment. Rebecca Winters turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Olivia, you've worked on the Blackstone account for how long? 4 years, I replied. Initially as supporting analyst, then as lead strategist for their international expansion initiatives for the past 2 years. And your recommendations have consistently outperformed market averages? Yes. The Southeast Asian portfolio components I've structured have exceeded benchmarks by approximately 18% over the past 18 months. Michael Chen nodded, having reviewed those performance metrics himself. That's consistent with our internal tracking. Your recommendations across multiple client portfolios have demonstrated superior results, particularly in emerging market contexts. Jonathan Galloway placed his hands flat on the table, a gesture that typically signaled a decision point in discussions. We have a $34 million client relationship explicitly requesting a specific advisor based on demonstrated expertise and performance. This doesn't strike me as a particularly complicated situation. He turned to Palmer. Gregory, your concerns about relationship management protocols are noted, but client preferences must take precedence, particularly with relationships of this magnitude. Palmer's expression remained rigidly professional, though the tension in his jaw revealed his displeasure. With respect, Jonathan, altering established relationship structures creates precedents that can destabilize our entire client management framework. If individual clients begin selecting specific advisors rather than engaging with our team structure, the implications for resource allocation and compensation models become problematic. Rebecca Winters raised an elegant eyebrow. Are you suggesting we should deny a major client's explicit request for specific expertise in order to maintain internal structural convenience? When framed so directly, Palmer's position sounded absurd, prioritizing organizational politics over client service. He attempted to recover with a more nuanced argument. I'm suggesting that relationship continuity provides significant value to clients through consistent understanding of their overall financial picture. Individual advisor preferences, while understandable, sometimes reflect incomplete appreciation of the broader advisory context. Jonathan Galloway had been watching this exchange with the patient evaluation of someone who had witnessed countless corporate disagreements over his long career. He turned to me with unexpected directness. Olivia, setting aside organizational considerations for a moment, what do you believe would best serve Blackstone's interests in this situation? The question cut through the political positioning to the core purpose of our work, serving client needs. I responded with equal directness. Blackstone is undertaking a significant strategic pivot with their manufacturing expansion. The regulatory complexities of Southeast Asian markets require specialized expertise for optimal positioning. Their interests would be best served by direct access to that expertise without unnecessary communication layers, particularly during the critical implementation phase of the next 12 to 18 months. Galloway nodded, seemingly satisfied with the client-centered perspective. That aligns with Richard's expressed concerns. He specifically mentioned implementation timelines as a factor in their request for restructured communication channels. He turned to his fellow managing partners. I believe our path forward is clear. Olivia will assume primary relationship management for the Blackstone account, with appropriate support resources allocated accordingly. Gregory will transition to an oversight role for the broader manufacturing sector clients, leveraging his experience across the portfolio while allowing specialized expertise to flow directly to clients when requested. The decision was delivered with the calm finality that had characterized Jonathan Galloway's leadership for decades: pragmatic, client-focused, and neatly sidestepping the political undercurrents while still addressing them effectively. Palmer's expression remained professionally neutral, though the slight color in his cheeks betrayed his reaction to the effective demotion. I'm not certain that arrangement optimizes our resource deployment, Jonathan. Client satisfaction optimizes our resource deployment better than any internal structure, Galloway replied firmly. Richard Blackstone has been explicit about their requirements. Our responsibility is to meet those requirements effectively. Rebecca Winters turned to me. Olivia, please prepare a transition plan for the Blackstone relationship, including staffing recommendations and communication protocols. We'll need to ensure seamless continuity during this restructuring." "Of course," I agreed, maintaining professional composure despite the significant victory the decision represented. "I'll have that prepared by tomorrow morning." "Excellent," Jonathan Galloway concluded, gathering his papers. "Gregory, please remain for a few moments to discuss the manufacturing sector oversight role. Olivia, thank you for your contributions today." The dismissal was clear and professionally delivered. As I gathered my materials to depart, I caught Michael Chen's subtle nod of approval, a quiet acknowledgement from the firm's strategic architect that the outcome aligned with Galloway's fundamental values despite the political disruption it caused. In the elevator descending to my office floor, I allowed myself a moment to process what had just occurred. In less than 36 hours, I had gone from being publicly undermined by Palmer to having the firm's founding partners explicitly endorse my expertise and assign me primary responsibility for our largest client relationship. The victory wasn't simply personal, but represented a validation of principle, that substantive expertise and client-centered service should take precedence over hierarchical politics and relationship gatekeeping. The partners had chosen professional substance over organizational convention when forced to prioritize between them. As I reached my office, Megan was waiting with evident curiosity. "How did it go?" "I'll be assuming primary responsibility for the Blackstone relationship," I replied simply, still processing the implications myself. Her eyes widened slightly. "And Palmer?" "We'll transition to a broader oversight role for the manufacturing sector portfolio." Megan's professional composure slipped momentarily as she processed the significance of this restructuring. Palmer's effective demotion and my corresponding elevation represented a seismic shift in the office politics she navigated daily. The Blackstone client requested this specifically? Yes, following this morning's meeting about the Vietnam expansion strategy. She shook her head slightly in wonderment. "When Palmer undermined you in yesterday's presentation, I was worried about your position here. Now, 24 hours later. The situation has evolved unexpectedly," I acknowledged, understating the dramatic reversal of fortune. "Your office arrangements will need to change," Megan noted practically. "Primary relationship managers for clients that size typically move to the executive floor." The observation highlighted the cascading implications of the partner's decision. Not just responsibility and authority, but physical positioning within the firm's carefully calibrated status hierarchy. My modest office on the advisory floor would be replaced by more spacious accommodations among the senior leadership. "Let's focus on the transition plan first," I suggested. Rebecca Winters requested it by tomorrow morning. As Megan departed, to gather the necessary information, I sat at my desk and allowed myself a moment of reflection. The victory brought both validation and responsibility. The opportunity to implement my strategic vision directly, but also accountability for the results that followed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the Blackstone appointment. Well-deserved recognition of exceptional work. Michael Chen." The direct acknowledgement from the firm's chief investment officer, a figure known for his rigorous standards and sparing praise, represented another layer of professional validation. My analytical approach and technical expertise had been recognized at the highest levels of the organization. As I began drafting the transition plan for the Blackstone relationship, I reflected on the extraordinary reversal these 24 hours had brought. Palmer's attempt to publicly diminish me had inadvertently created the conditions for my expertise to be seen clearly by those who valued substance over politics. The humiliation that had seemed so devastating yesterday had become the catalyst for profound professional advancement today. Not through political maneuvering or strategic positioning, but through the simple power of substantive expertise allowed to speak for itself when the artificial constraints of hierarchical filtering were temporarily removed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, establishing appropriate boundaries with Palmer in our revised roles, developing effective communication protocols for the Blackstone team, and delivering on the expectations that came with elevated responsibility. But today had demonstrated a fundamental truth that would guide my approach moving forward. Excellence speaks for itself when given the opportunity to reach those who recognize its value. The boardroom humiliation had not been an ending but a beginning. The painful but necessary disruption that allowed authentic expertise to emerge from behind the shadows of political positioning and finally stand in its own light. The morning, after the partners' meeting, dawned with crystalline clarity, both literally and figuratively. The Chicago skyline stood in sharp relief against a cloudless blue sky as I arrived at Galloway Financial Partners an hour earlier than usual. The transition plan for the Blackstone relationship had occupied my evening, but the work had energized, rather than depleted me. There is a particular satisfaction in solving complex problems when you have both the authority and the expertise to implement effective solutions. The office was quiet at 7 a.m., the trading floor not yet humming with its usual frenetic energy. I appreciated these early moments, the calm before the daily storm of meetings, calls, and constant decision-making that defined financial advisory work. Today, that calm felt especially valuable as I prepared for the significant transition ahead. Jonathan Galloway's executive assistant, Eleanor, was already at her desk when I arrived on the executive floor to deliver the completed transition plan. In her 30 years with the firm, Eleanor had observed the rise and fall of countless careers, making her one of the most politically astute individuals in the organization, despite her deliberately understated presence. "Good morning, Ms. Chen." She greeted me with professional warmth. "Mr. Galloway mentioned you would be bringing materials this morning. He's asked that you join the managing partners at 9 for a follow-up discussion." "Thank you, Eleanor. I have the transition plan completed as requested," I replied, handing her the bound document I had finalized at midnight. "Please let Mr. Galloway know I'll be available at 9. She accepted the document with a slight nod. "Also, facilities management will be contacting you today about your office relocation. The corner suite on the executive floor has been allocated for your use given your new responsibilities." The information was delivered matter-of-factly, but its significance was substantial. The corner suite had previously belonged to Thomas Harrington, the firm's former international investments director who had retired 3 months earlier. Its allocation to me rather than Palmer or another senior advisor represented a clear statement about my new standing within the organization. "I see," I replied, maintaining professional composure despite my surprise. "Thank you for letting me know." As I turned to leave, Eleanor added a final comment that revealed more than might be immediately apparent. "Mr. Galloway has also scheduled a meeting with Mr. Palmer for 8:30 this morning. He suggested you might want to be available afterward in case there are any questions about the transition structure." The subtext was clear. The managing partners had made their decision. Palmer would be formally informed of the details this morning, and potential friction might require immediate clarification. Eleanor's 3 decades of navigating executive dynamics had taught her to anticipate and prepare for political aftershocks. "I'll make sure I'm available," I assured her, grateful for the insights that came with her seemingly straightforward information. Returning to my soon-to-be former office, I found Megan already at her desk, despite the early hour. Her efficiency one of the many reasons I had requested her as my assistant when I first earned the right to dedicated support staff. "The transition plan is delivered," I informed her. "And apparently I'm being relocated to the executive floor corner suite." Megan's eyes widened slightly, her professional mask slipping momentarily to reveal genuine surprise. "The Harrington office? That's significant." "Indeed," I acknowledged. "The managing partners seem to be making a rather clear statement with that allocation. One that won't go unnoticed by anyone in the firm, she observed, especially by those who witnessed yesterday's presentation dynamics. The unstated question hung between us. How would Palmer respond to this very public repositioning of our relative standings within the organization? His carefully cultivated image as the gatekeeper to Galloway's most valuable client relationships was being fundamentally disrupted, with my elevation serving as a visible symbol of that disruption. The partners have scheduled a meeting with Palmer at 8:30 this morning, I noted. We should prepare for various potential reactions. Megan nodded, already shifting into strategic planning mode. I'll coordinate with Eleanor about the office transition timing. It might be advisable to schedule the physical move during the Blackstone implementation meeting tomorrow, when most of the senior advisors will be occupied elsewhere. Her suggestion reflected a keen understanding of office politics. Minimizing the spectacle of my elevation would reduce unnecessary friction during an already complex transition. Such practical considerations might seem trivial in the context of multi-million-dollar client relationships, but organizational harmony often depended on precisely such attentiveness to psychological dynamics. Good thinking, I agreed. Also, please prepare meeting requests for the Blackstone advisory team for later today. I'll want to discuss the revised relationship structure and implementation approach with everyone who will be supporting the account. For the next hour, we worked systematically through the logistical aspects of the transition, identifying team members with complementary expertise for the expanded Blackstone relationship, developing communication protocols for different types of client requests, and establishing clear documentation standards for the implementation phase. At precisely 8:25 a.m., my office phone rang, Eleanor informing me that Palmer had arrived for his meeting with the managing partners. The timing wasn't coincidental. She was ensuring I remained aware of the meeting's progress, another example of the subtle information flows that shaped executive dynamics. Thank you, Eleanor, I replied, understanding the unspoken suggestion to remain available. 9 minutes later, Megan appeared in my doorway, her expression conveying urgency without alarm. Palmer just left the partners' meeting. He didn't return to his office. He went directly to the elevator. The abrupt departure suggested the meeting had not gone as Palmer might have hoped. Whatever attempt he had made to modify or reverse, the partner's decision had evidently proven unsuccessful. My phone rang again. This time, Rebecca Winter's assistant, informing me that the managing partners were ready to meet now rather than waiting until 9 o'clock. The accelerated timeline further suggested that Palmer's reaction had necessitated more immediate implementation of the transition plan. The executive conference room presented a different energy than the previous day. Jonathan Galloway sat reviewing documents with his characteristic focus, while Rebecca Winters and Michael Chen conferred quietly at one end of the table. Their conversation paused as I entered, all three partners turning their attention to me, with expressions that combined professional seriousness with what appeared to be cautious satisfaction. Olivia, thank you for adjusting your schedule, Jonathan Galloway began. We've reviewed your transition plan for the Blackstone relationship. Excellent work on such short notice. The implementation timeline and team structure are particularly well considered. Thank you, sir, I replied, taking the seat he indicated across from Rebecca Winters. We've just concluded our conversation with Gregory, Galloway continued, his tone carefully neutral. He has strong perspectives on the relationship restructuring. Rebecca Winters' slight eye roll suggested Palmer's strong perspectives had been delivered with less than complete professional detachment. Michael Chen, ever the strategist, moved the conversation forward. The transition plan you've developed aligns with our thinking about the broader reorganization of our international advisory services, he noted. Blackstone's request for your direct leadership provides an opportunity to implement changes we've been considering for some time. This contextual framing was significant, positioning my elevation as part of a larger strategic shift rather than simply a response to one client's preferences. It suggested the partners had identified systemic issues in Galloway's approach to expertise deployment and were using this situation as a catalyst for broader organizational evolution. Jonathan Galloway slid a document across the table, a revised organizational chart for Galloway's International Investment Division. To my surprise, my name appeared directly beneath the managing partners, with a newly created title, Senior Director, Strategic Advisory Services. We're taking this opportunity to implement structural changes that better align expertise with client needs, Galloway explained. Your new position will oversee high-complexity client relationships, where specialized strategic guidance is the primary value driver. Gregory will continue managing the broader client portfolio with emphasis on relationship continuity for established accounts. The restructuring represented far more than a simple client reassignment. It created an entirely new leadership track within Galloway's hierarchy, one that prioritized technical expertise and strategic insight over traditional relationship management. My placement at the head of this new structure sent an unmistakable message about the firm's evolving values. This is a significant organizational change, I observed, studying the chart carefully. Necessary evolution, Rebecca Winters responded. Financial advisory services are increasingly specialized. Our most sophisticated clients are explicitly requesting direct access to specific expertise rather than generalist relationship management. Blackstone isn't unique in this regard. They're simply the most direct in expressing the preference. Michael Chen nodded in agreement. Our analysis indicates that client retention and asset growth correlate more strongly with technical expertise than with relationship longevity in complex advisory contexts. This restructuring aligns our organizational model with that reality. The data-driven justification was characteristic of Chen's approach, using empirical evidence to drive strategic decisions rather than defaulting to traditional industry practices. It also provided substantial institutional support for my new position, framing it as a strategic necessity rather than merely a response to Palmer's missteps. Jonathan Galloway leaned forward slightly, his expression more personal than it had been previously. Olivia, this represents a significant advancement with corresponding expectations. The senior director position includes equity participation and management responsibilities beyond the Blackstone relationship. Are you prepared for that level of accountability? The question was direct and consequential, acknowledging both the opportunity and the substantial pressure that would accompany it. My answer would commit me to a fundamentally different career trajectory than I had envisioned just 48 hours earlier. I am, I replied with quiet confidence. The advisory approach I've developed for Blackstone reflects my broader philosophy about financial services. That deep expertise thoughtfully applied creates superior outcomes for sophisticated clients. I welcome the opportunity to implement that approach more systematically. Galloway studied me for a moment before nodding with evident satisfaction. Well stated. Your transition plan demonstrates precisely that capacity for systematic implementation. We'll announce the organizational changes this afternoon following your initial meetings with the Blackstone advisory team. Rebecca Winters passed me another document, this one outlining compensation structures for the new position, including base salary, performance incentives, and equity allocation. The numbers represented a substantial increase over my current compensation, particularly the equity component that would align my long-term interests directly with the firm's growth. The compensation structure reflects both your expanded responsibilities and our expectations for the Strategic Advisory Services Division, she explained. The equity component vests over 5 years, which we believe provides appropriate alignment with the firm's sustainable growth objectives. As I reviewed the document, Michael Chen addressed the elephant in the room, Palmer's reaction to the restructuring. Gregory has expressed concerns about these changes. While he understands the strategic rationale, he's indicated he may need time to consider whether the new structure aligns with his professional objectives. The diplomatic phrasing suggested Palmer had not accepted the reorganization gracefully. His abrupt departure from the morning meeting suddenly made more sense. He was likely considering his options, possibly including departure from the firm altogether. How would you like me to approach the advisory team meetings today, given these circumstances? I asked, recognizing the delicate transition period ahead. With transparent professionalism, Jonathan Galloway replied without hesitation. Present the restructuring as a strategic evolution designed to better serve client needs through specialized expertise deployment. Acknowledge the transition may create temporary uncertainty, but emphasize the underlying rationale. And regarding Palmer specifically? I inquired, needing clarity on how to navigate that particularly complex relationship. Rebecca Winters answered with characteristic directness. Gregory will determine his own path forward. Until he makes that decision, maintain professional courtesy while proceeding with the implementation as outlined. The organizational needs take precedence over individual adaptation timelines. The guidance was clear. The transition would proceed regardless of Palmer's personal reaction, a decisive approach that reflected the partners' commitment to the restructuring despite potential disruption. The meeting concluded with discussion of practical next steps, including the office relocation, advisory team restructuring, and formal communication to Blackstone confirming their request for revised relationship management had been approved and implemented. As I left the executive conference room, Eleanor approached with a sealed envelope. This arrived for you this morning by courier. It's from Blackstone Industries. The timing suggested the correspondence had been prepared yesterday following our meeting, well before the partners' decision had been finalized and communicated. I thanked Eleanor and opened the envelope once I had returned to my office. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard Blackstone on his personal stationery. Ms. Chen, following our discussion yesterday, I've communicated to Jonathan Galloway our strong preference for your direct leadership of the Blackstone relationship moving forward. Your analytical rigor and forthright presentation of strategic options align with our approach to decision-making. I look forward to implementing the Vietnam expansion under your guidance. Regards, Richard Blackstone. The personal communication represented another layer of validation. Blackstone hadn't simply requested a structural change, but had specifically endorsed my professional approach and expertise. The note's timing, sent before the partners' decision was confirmed, demonstrated confidence that Galloway would accommodate their request rather than risk losing a major client relationship. Megan appeared in my doorway. Facilities Management has confirmed your office transition will occur tomorrow between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. during the Blackstone implementation meeting as we discussed. Also, the advisory team is assembled in Conference Room C whenever you're ready to begin. The gathered advisory team represented Galloway's international investment specialists, 8 professionals who had previously operated under Palmer's hierarchical direction, providing specialized analysis that he would then filter and present to clients according to his own judgment. Their expressions as I entered the conference room ranged from curious to apprehensive, clearly aware that significant changes were underway but uncertain how those changes would affect their positions. Good morning, everyone, I began, taking position at the head of the table, a physical positioning that immediately signaled the shifting authority structure. Thank you for adjusting your schedules for this meeting. The managing partners have approved a strategic reorganization of our international advisory services that will affect all of us in various ways. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the new structure being implemented, emphasizing the underlying strategic rationale, better alignment of specialized expertise with sophisticated client needs, rather than the specific circumstances involving Blackstone that had catalyzed the changes. I presented the restructuring as an evolutionary development driven by changing market demands rather than a response to interpersonal dynamics. The core principle guiding this reorganization is direct expertise deployment, I explained. Our most sophisticated clients increasingly value specialized knowledge over generalist relationship management. The new Strategic Advisory Services division will facilitate that direct connection between client needs and relevant expertise. As I detailed specific operational changes, revised reporting structures, new collaboration protocols, modified client communication channels, I observed the team's reactions evolving from initial uncertainty toward cautious optimism. For many of these specialists, the restructuring represented liberation from a system that had often subordinated their expertise to relationship management priorities. "What about Gregory?" asked Diane Martinez, our regulatory specialist who had frequently seen her detailed analyses simplified beyond recognition in Palmer's client presentations. "How does he fit into this new structure?" The question directly addressed what everyone was wondering but hesitant to ask explicitly. I responded with professional neutrality while providing the necessary clarity. Gregory will continue managing established client relationships where continuity is the primary value driver. The Strategic Advisory Services Division will focus on complex relationships where specialized expertise represents the core client need. We'll be working collaboratively where relationships span both categories. The measured response acknowledged Palmer's continuing role while clearly establishing the separate and equal standing of the new division I would lead. The team exchanged glances, processing the implications of this significant reorganization of the power dynamics they had operated within for years. "This transition will require adjustments from all of us," I acknowledged. "But it also creates opportunities for your expertise to reach clients more directly, with fewer filtering layers between your analysis and the decision-makers who need it. I believe that alignment ultimately serves both our clients and our professional development." As the meeting progressed to specific implementation details, the team's engagement visibly increased. Ideas and suggestions emerged organically as they recognized the potential in a structure that valued their specialized knowledge more directly than the previous hierarchy had allowed. By the meeting's conclusion, what had begun as apprehensive uncertainty had evolved into cautious enthusiasm about the possibilities the restructuring created. The team departed with clear next steps and a sense of purpose that transcended the organizational politics that had prompted the changes. Left alone in the conference room, I took a moment to absorb the extraordinary transformation of the past 48 hours. From being publicly undermined in a client presentation to leading a newly created division with equity partnership and expanded authority, the trajectory was so dramatic it seemed almost unreal. Yet the catalyst for this transformation had been Palmer's attempt to diminish me. His public humiliation strategy, intended to reinforce hierarchical control, had instead exposed the fundamental weakness in his approach to client service. By attempting to position my expertise as subordinate to his authority, he had inadvertently highlighted its value to the client who mattered most. My phone chimed with a message from Megan. "Eleanor called. Palmer has requested a meeting with you at 2:00 p.m. in his office." The request wasn't entirely unexpected, though its timing suggested Palmer had been processing the reorganization and determining his response. That he had requested the meeting occur in his office rather than mine indicated a desire to maintain some symbolic authority in the interaction, a small but telling detail about his psychological adjustment to the new reality. As I gathered my materials and prepared for my next meeting, I reflected on the fundamental lesson these events had reinforced. Expertise genuinely developed and confidently presented will eventually find its appropriate value, even when temporarily obscured by politics or positioning. Palmer's attempt to claim credit for my work had backfired spectacularly precisely because the gap between his positioning and my actual contributions had become too visible to ignore. The path forward would undoubtedly contain challenges: managing a newly formed division, navigating the complex relationship with Palmer during this transition, and delivering on the substantial expectations now placed upon me by both clients and partners. But these were challenges born of opportunity rather than constraint, of recognition rather than limitation. The humiliation that had seemed so devastating in the moment had become the catalyst for extraordinary professional advancement. Not through political maneuvering or strategic networking, but through the simple power of expertise allowed to speak for itself when artificial constraints were temporarily removed. As I walked toward my next meeting, this one with Blackstone's implementation team to begin executing the Vietnam manufacturing strategy, I carried myself with a quiet confidence born not of title or position, but of the validated knowledge that excellence ultimately finds its rightful place when given the opportunity to be truly seen. The boardroom humiliation had not destroyed my career as Palmer might have intended. Instead, it had created the perfect conditions for transformation, revealing the true value of expertise over politics, substance over positioning, and genuine client service over hierarchical control. In attempting to diminish me, Palmer had inadvertently illuminated precisely what made my contribution invaluable. At precisely 2 p.m., I arrived at Palmer's office, mentally prepared for various scenarios. Despite the dramatic shift in our organizational positions, I had decided to approach this conversation with professional respect, not out of deference to his former authority, but as a reflection of my own leadership principles. Palmer's office remained an imposing space, the corner location with its sweeping views, carefully curated artwork, and substantial mahogany desk all designed to communicate power and influence. Yet today, the carefully constructed environment seemed more theatrical than intimidating, the elaborate stage setting for a performance whose audience had suddenly departed. He was standing at the window when I entered, gazing out at the Chicago skyline with hands clasped behind his back. The posture seemed deliberately chosen, perhaps from some business leadership manual on projecting authority during difficult conversations. He didn't turn immediately, allowing the silence to stretch for several seconds before acknowledging my presence. "Olivia," he finally said, turning with practiced composure, "thank you for making time in what must be a very busy schedule given your new responsibilities." The slight pause before new responsibilities carried a subtle edge, suggesting he viewed my promotion as somehow artificial or unearned, a political accommodation rather than a merit-based advancement. "Of course, Gregory," I replied evenly, taking a seat across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. The small assertion of equal standing was deliberate, establishing from the outset that our conversation would occur between colleagues rather than superior and subordinate. Palmer took his seat, studying me with an inscrutable expression before speaking. "Interesting how quickly fortunes can change in this business, isn't it? Yesterday morning you were presenting to Blackstone, under my supervision. Today you're heading a newly created division with equity partnership." His tone carried a mixture of incredulity and something darker, perhaps resentment at how rapidly the power dynamic had shifted. Rather than engaging with the implied criticism, I focused on the substantive transition ahead. "The organizational changes reflect evolving client needs and strategic priorities," I noted. "I assume you wanted to discuss how we'll manage shared client relationships during this transition period?" Palmer's lips tightened momentarily at my redirection before he regained his composed expression. "Direct as always, Olivia. Yes, the transition mechanics are certainly important, though I'm also curious about your perspective on how we reached this juncture so precipitously." The invitation to discuss the personal dynamics behind the reorganization seemed designed to draw me into either defensive justification or gloating triumph. Either response would diminish my standing in the conversation. I chose instead to maintain professional focus. "The partners have outlined a clear strategic rationale for the restructuring," I replied. "Sophisticated clients increasingly value direct access to specialized expertise. The new divisional structure aligns our organizational model with that reality." Palmer leaned back slightly, a thin smile appearing. A perfectly rehearsed response. Though we both know the catalyst wasn't some abstract strategic evolution, but rather a single client relationship, one I've managed successfully for 8 years. suddenly demanding changes based on a 40-minute presentation. The attempt to reframe my elevation as a disproportionate response to a minor client preference rather than recognition of substantive expertise revealed much about Palmer's perspective. He truly believed the restructuring was an overreaction, rather than a correction of a systemic issue. Richard Blackstone's request certainly highlighted the value of specialized expertise, I acknowledged carefully. But the partner's response suggests they've been considering these structural issues for some time. Michael Chen specifically mentioned correlation data between expertise access and client retention that predates the Blackstone situation. Palmer waved a dismissive hand. Michael always has data to support whatever direction the wind happens to be blowing. The reality, Olivia, is that you've been handed an extraordinary opportunity based on a single client relationship that I built over nearly a decade. The fundamental disconnect in our perspectives was now fully visible. Palmer genuinely believed he had built the Blackstone relationship through relationship management skills, while viewing my expertise as merely supplementary, a technical resource to be deployed at his discretion, rather than the core value driver for a sophisticated client. I recognize the length of Galloway's relationship with Blackstone, I said evenly, and I hope we can collaborate effectively during this transition to ensure continued excellent service. Palmer studied me for a moment, seemingly reassessing his approach. Let's be candid, Olivia. This restructuring has created a professionally awkward situation. We both know that Blackstone represents a significant portion of my annual performance metrics. Their sudden reassignment to your new division will have material implications for my standing within the firm. The concern was legitimate. Galloway's compensation models for senior advisors heavily weighted client retention and asset growth for assigned relationships. Losing Blackstone would indeed significantly impact Palmer's performance evaluation and bonus structure. I understand that concern, I replied with genuine empathy. Have you discussed transitional performance metrics with the partners? They've offered certain accommodations, Palmer acknowledged, his expression suggesting he found these insufficient. But the broader implication for my future at Galloway remains uncertain. Perception matters in this business, as you're certainly discovering. The subtle reference to my own rapid status change carried a warning that organizational standing could shift quickly in both directions. Yet beneath the cautionary note, I sensed something more constructive emerging. A pragmatic recognition that our future interactions would require some mutual accommodation, regardless of personal feelings. The restructuring creates both challenges and opportunities, I observed. Your experience managing complex client relationships remains invaluable to Galloway. The new structure simply allows for more direct deployment of specialized expertise, where clients specifically request it. Palmer's expression suggested skepticism about this framing, but he seemed to recognize the futility of further contesting the partner's decision. So where does that leave us practically speaking? We have several overlapping client relationships beyond Blackstone. The shift toward operational considerations represented progress, moving from personal reaction to professional problem-solving. I opened my portfolio and removed a document I had prepared in anticipation of this conversation. I've drafted a proposed transition framework for shared clients, I explained, sliding the document across his desk. It establishes clear responsibility boundaries while ensuring consistent client experience. For relationships like Davidson Manufacturing and Westridge Technologies, where you've had long-standing engagement but they require specific strategic expertise, I've suggested a collaborative approach with defined communication protocols. Palmer scanned the document with evident surprise, perhaps not expecting such thorough preparation for this aspect of the transition. The framework I had developed explicitly acknowledged his historical client relationships while creating pathways for specialized expertise to reach those clients without disrupting established rapport. This is comprehensive, he admitted, continuing to review the detailed protocols. though I notice Blackstone is categorized as a complete transition rather than a collaborative relationship. That reflects their explicit request for restructured relationship management, I explained. However, your historical knowledge of their portfolio remains valuable. I've included a transition consultation role to ensure that institutional knowledge is properly incorporated into their ongoing strategy. The consultation role represented both a practical need for knowledge transfer and a professional courtesy, acknowledging Palmer's contributions while respecting the client's clear preference for new leadership. After several moments of careful review, he placed the document on his desk with deliberate precision. Pragmatic and thorough, he acknowledged. I would expect nothing less from you, Olivia. Your attention to analytical detail has always been impressive, even when we've disagreed on implementation approaches. The compliment, however reluctantly offered, suggested a potential path forward based on mutual professional respect rather than personal reconciliation. I accepted it with a simple nod, recognizing the significance of even this small concession. There's one additional matter we should address, Palmer continued, his tone shifting toward something more personal. Your rapid elevation will create certain expectations among the broader advisory team. Many of them have worked under my direction for years with well-established protocols and reporting structures. The transition will require careful management to avoid unnecessary disruption. The observation contained both legitimate concern and subtle warning that I might face challenges in assuming leadership over teams previously loyal to his management approach. It represented perhaps the most substantial practical challenge, in the restructuring beyond the client transition itself. I appreciate that perspective, I replied thoughtfully. The advisory team meeting this morning focused extensively on maintaining continuity while implementing necessary changes. Their specialized expertise has been consistently exceptional. The restructuring simply creates more direct channels for that expertise to reach clients. Some may view it that way, Palmer allowed. Others may see it as disruption to established practices that have served the firm well for many years. The comment revealed a fundamental difference in our assessment of Galloway's previous structure. What Palmer viewed as effective established practices, I recognized as unnecessary filtering layers that had often obscured or diluted specialized expertise before it reached clients. Change always presents adjustment challenges, I acknowledged. But the team's response this morning suggested genuine enthusiasm for more direct client engagement. I believe most will embrace the opportunity once they experience the benefits of reduced filtering layers. Palmer's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at the term filtering layers, perhaps recognizing it as a diplomatic characterization of his own management approach. After a moment's consideration, he nodded slowly. Perhaps, he conceded. Time will tell which approach better serves Galloway's interests. The market has a way of revealing truth eventually. The statement carried a hint of challenge, suggesting that my leadership would ultimately be judged by performance outcomes rather than organizational titles. It was a perspective I wholly embraced. On that we completely agree, I replied with genuine conviction. Results ultimately speak for themselves. Palmer seemed mildly surprised by my ready acceptance of this accountability standard. After a brief silence, he shifted toward more concrete transition matters. The Vietnam implementation for Blackstone begins tomorrow, he noted. You'll need comprehensive background on their broader portfolio context beyond the manufacturing expansion itself. I would welcome your insights, I replied, recognizing both the practical necessity and the professional courtesy in his offer. Their investment history with Galloway predates my involvement by several years. For the next 45 minutes, our conversation focused entirely on practical knowledge transfer, Palmer providing valuable historical context about Blackstone's risk tolerance patterns, decision-making processes, and past investment outcomes. Despite our complicated personal dynamics, His professionalism in sharing this institutional knowledge was commendable. As our meeting concluded, Palmer rose from his desk with a thoughtful expression. One final observation, Olivia. Leadership. Positions come with challenges beyond technical expertise. The political navigation required at executive levels operates by different rules than most expect. The partners have shown extraordinary confidence in your capabilities, but maintaining that confidence requires different skills than building it initially. The comment contained both warning and genuine insight, perhaps the closest Palmer could come to offering advice based on his own experience. I considered it carefully before responding. I appreciate that perspective, I replied. Sincerely. Each organizational level presents unique challenges requiring continuous adaptation. Palmer nodded, seemingly satisfied with this acknowledgement. Indeed. And speaking of adaptation, I understand you'll be occupying the Harrington suite beginning tomorrow. Yes. The facilities team has scheduled the transition during the Blackstone implementation meeting. A suitable location given your new responsibilities, he observed neutrally. Thomas always appreciated the morning light in that corner. He claimed it provided clarity for difficult decisions. The small personal detail about my office predecessor suggested a desire to end our conversation on a more collegial note, acknowledging the practical reality of my elevation while offering a small gesture of professional acceptance. I'll keep that in mind, I replied with a slight smile. Thank you for your time today, Gregory. The transition framework and historical context will be invaluable in ensuring continuity during this restructuring. As I departed Palmer's office, I reflected on the conversation's evolution. From his initial attempt to frame my promotion as disproportionate luck to the eventually pragmatic discussion of transition mechanics. While personal reconciliation might never be possible given our history, a workable professional accommodation seemed achievable. Returning to my current office where Megan waited expectantly, I provided a brief summary of the conversation. It was surprisingly constructive. We've established a transition framework for shared clients, and he provided valuable historical context for the Blackstone portfolio. That's unexpected, she admitted. The rumors suggested he was considering resignation after this morning's partner meeting. I think he's reassessing his options, I replied thoughtfully. The restructuring represents a significant adjustment to his standing within Galloway, but there are still substantial opportunities within his revised role. Before Megan could respond, my phone rang. Richard Blackstone himself, rather than his assistant, unusual for mid-afternoon when he typically delegated communications to his executive team. Olivia Chen, I answered. Ms. Chen, Richard Blackstone here. I've just received confirmation from Jonathan Galloway about your new role leading our advisory relationship. Excellent news that allows us to proceed with implementation planning for the Vietnam expansion. Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. We're fully prepared for tomorrow's implementation meeting to establish the execution timeline and resource allocation. Precisely why I'm calling, he continued. Our board has accelerated the approval process for the first phase funding based on your regulatory analysis. We'll need to adjust the implementation timeline accordingly, moving the initial regulatory filings forward by approximately 6 weeks. The accelerated timeline represented a significant vote of confidence in the strategy I had developed. Blackstone committing substantial capital earlier than originally planned, based on the strategic approach I had recommended, despite Palmer's attempts to position it as speculative or supplementary. We can certainly accommodate that acceleration, I confirmed. I'll adjust the implementation materials for tomorrow's meeting to reflect the revised timeline. Excellent. One additional matter, our new VP of Asian Operations, Dr. Lin, has suggested we consider establishing the technology transfer protocols before the manufacturing facility development, rather than concurrently as originally planned. Your thoughts? The question represented exactly the kind of direct expertise consultation that sophisticated clients valued, specific technical guidance rather than relationship management. It confirmed that Blackstone's request for restructured advisory leadership had been driven by substantive needs rather than personality preferences. Dr. Lin's suggestion aligns with my analysis, I replied. Establishing the technology transfer protocols first creates significant regulatory advantages, particularly regarding intellectual property protection. The sequencing would need careful coordination, but the benefits substantially outweigh the logistical complications. That's precisely what May suggested, Blackstone confirmed, satisfaction evident in his tone. I appreciate having direct access to your expertise on these matters, Ms. Chen. The implementation complexity requires exactly this kind of unfiltered analysis. After concluding the call, I turned to Megan with renewed purpose. We need to update the implementation materials for tomorrow. Blackstone has accelerated their timeline based on our regulatory analysis. Her expression reflected both surprise and satisfaction. They're moving forward more quickly because of your recommendation? Even after Palmer spent months advocating for the Chinese alternative? Yes, and they've specifically endorsed the modified sequencing approach with technology transfer protocols established before physical facility development, the exact approach Palmer characterized as unnecessarily complex in our planning discussions. The validation was substantial, not just organizational elevation through title and position, but practical confirmation that my expertise directly influenced client decision-making when allowed to reach them without unnecessary filtering or reframing. As we worked through the implementation timeline adjustments, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation the past 48 hours had brought. Palmer's attempt to publicly diminish my expertise had inadvertently created perfect conditions for its true value to become visible to those who mattered most, our most sophisticated client and the firm's managing partners. The corner office, equity partnership, and divisional leadership were significant professional advancements, but they represented recognition rather than transformation. The true change had occurred in the direct connection between specialized expertise and client decision-making, precisely the value alignment that had motivated my work for years, despite the political constraints that had often obscured it. By 6:30 p.m., the revised implementation materials were complete, incorporating Blackstone's accelerated timeline and Dr. Lin's modified sequencing approach. Tomorrow's meeting would establish the execution framework for a manufacturing expansion, strategy that would significantly impact Blackstone's international positioning for years to come. A strategy developed through my analysis despite Palmer's attempts to marginalize it as theoretical or supplementary. As I prepared to leave for the evening, Eleanor called with a final update. Mr. Galloway asked me to inform you that the organizational announcement will be distributed firm-wide at 9 a.m. tomorrow, before your Blackstone implementation meeting. He suggested you might want to prepare your new division team for the official communication. The timing was significant. The public announcement would occur before the physical office transition, ensuring the organizational restructuring was clearly established before the visible symbols of changed status appeared. It represented thoughtful change management from leadership that had orchestrated many such transitions over decades. Thank you, Eleanor. I'll make sure the team is prepared. After ending the call, I sent a brief message to the advisory specialists, who would form the core of the new Strategic Advisory Services Division, requesting they gather briefly before tomorrow's regular morning meeting. The organizational announcement would likely generate substantial reaction throughout Galloway's offices, and I wanted my team prepared to maintain focus on client deliverables amid the inevitable discussions. As I finally left the office for the evening, I encountered Michael Chen waiting by the elevator, an unusual location given his typical departure through the executive garage rather than the main lobby. Olivia, he greeted me with a slight nod. Productive day? Very, I confirmed. The transition framework is established, including knowledge transfer protocols for shared client relationships. Blackstone has also accelerated their implementation timeline based on the regulatory analysis. Chen nodded approvingly. Validation through client action rather than just organizational titles. The most meaningful confirmation of expertise value. His observation perfectly captured what mattered most about the day's developments, not the corner office or equity partnership, but the direct influence on client decision-making that represented the true purpose of our advisory work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,